steady cash, how would you survive? Would your dreams be on hold? What you're saying is correct. But I'm still angry. Best way to embrace peace. With peace and
My
unity,
people,
our country will
let
be a
us
better
embrace
place.
peace and unity. Let's learn to live as brothers.
The Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has raised the monetary policy rate, MPR, to 15.5% from 14% in an aggressive move to fight inflation in the country. The governor of the central bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, disclosed this while briefing the press at the end of the 5th Monetary Policy Committee meeting in 2022 in Abuja. He also announced an increase in the cash reserve ratio to a minimum of 32.5% from the July CRR of 22.5%, while retaining liquidity ratio at 30%. Mr. Emefiele said, and I quote, "The committee voted unanimously to raise the monetary policy rate, MPR. As a matter of fact, the MPC voted to raise the MPR to 15.5% to retain the asymmetric corridor at plus 100 minus 700 basis points around the MPR, and to increase the cash reserve ratio to a minimum of 32.5% and retain liquidity ratio at 30%, end of quote. Explaining further why the committee raised the ratio, the governor said the MPC noted with concern the continued aggressive movement in inflation, even after the rate hike at its meeting in May and July 2022, and also expressed its unrelenting resolve to restore price stability while providing the necessary support to strengthen the fragile recovery. The governor said that members deliberated on the impact of the widening margin between the current ratio rate of 14% and the inflation rate of 20.52%. Now, how necessary is this move to increase the monetary policy rate by the committee at this time? What will be the overall impact of this new monetary policy on the nation's economy? Will this move actually prevent inflation? And what are the ways forward? So many questions. Nigeria Today will address these issues in the course of this program as we discuss the new MPC/CBN monetary policy rate. I am Lydia Odijochi. Welcome you once again to the program. Joining me via Zoom is a member of the CBN Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, Professor Mike Obadan. Good to have you join us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you.
All right. And with me in the studio is an economist, a friend of the family, Yusha'u Aliyu. Nice to have you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, let me start with you. What is new about this new monetary policy?
You mean what is new?
Yes. What's different?
There is nothing new in the monetary policy rate or instrument per se. It's one of the primary instruments for regulating money supply, which, if not checked, can lead to, inflation or aggressive inflation, or may lead to hyperinflation. And so what is new here is the rate of increase in the monetary policy rate. As you rightly said, it's been increased from 14% to 15.5%. And actually the increases started in May. So I think that could be said to be what is new there. And the reason is very clear, that the rate at which headline inflation and even other components, core inflation, food inflation, the rate at which they've been escalating since February this year is rather alarming at this point in time, with the negative consequences of an uncontrolled inflation. I think that's the reason the bank, through the Monetary Policy Committee, decided to, utilize all necessary monetary policy instruments at this point in time, to check the inflation that seems to be becoming uncontrollable. So invariably, there is nothing new in the policy instruments. They have been used, and they will definitely continue to be used because they are the orthodox policy instruments available.
Okay, thank you. Now, Ishao, let me come to you. Now, in your opinion, will a policy like this be impactful to Nigerians, SMEs, MSMEs, and even investors at this critical time?
At the critical time, one of the most important fundamental aspects which I quite appreciate, that it has been an attempt by the CBN to control inflation, which Professor rightly pointed out is becoming uncontrollable. So if it is becoming uncontrollable, it means that we have to check other measures to deal with inflation, because there is a difference using monetary policy rate in a stagflated economy and then using it under a very nice moving economy. So when you realize that, I said it in January when the MPR was raised, and I accurately figured out I don't think it's going to control inflation. And now inflation was 15.64% in January. And today inflation is 20.52%. So when you now check whether the the right measure is being used to control inflation, and also looking at the economic event within the economy, you have to now look for other alternatives. And the SMEs, the business cycle, the main problem of the economy, based on the theory of high inflation and high unemployment at 33%, and you check inflation moving over 20%, that shows you that we have to check the type of inflation and the component. Food inflation, for instance, looking at the fact that we are just about to begin harvest, and looking at the SMEs that are agro-based are looking for the raw materials, especially the rice mill, and looking at the flooding that is taken away, then we have to go back to look at, one, the supply chain bottlenecks. Second, to look at the policy problems, that is the raising of monetary policy rate, cash reserve ratio, instruments that are traditionally used by the central bank. Most economies use those instruments, but my own contention all the time is the fact that each policy measure in macroeconomics is dependent on many variables. If you check money supply into the economy, it's not the same. This traditional domestic economy, that's Nigeria, is not the same with the United States-based economy. Looking at the fact that dollarization in our economy, politicians prefer to keep cash. There are so much cash out of the monetary market, and it's being kept. So much of funds is going to banditry in billions in the bush, doing nothing for the economy. And I think if we are to rescue this economy beyond measures, beyond monetary policy measures, we have to also look at other measures that will now balance the supply and check the bottlenecks.
Okay, Professor Mike, let me come to you. Could you further explain to Nigerians the CBN's 3.52% growth projection for the year 2022, and what the impact of the 9 trillion naira that the CBN has injected into the economy will have on our economy in the long or short run?
Well, let me say straight away that the Central Bank of Nigeria has not used just the monetary policy instruments. Given the nature of inflation in Nigeria, the bank has used, heterodox or unconventional, policy instruments to try to control inflation from the supply side, because the bank is fully aware that the inflation phenomenon in Nigeria may not have been triggered by growth in money supply alone, which requires traditional monetary policy instruments to deal with the huge demand created by liquidity injections into the economy. And to tackle the supply side, that is the reason why the bank has spent about 9 trillion naira through development financed interventions to ensure increase in the aggregate supply of goods and services in the economy, and thereby reduce the prices of goods and services. So invariably, it's not the case that the bank had just concentrated on, the traditional monetary policy instruments. And, people who don't seem to have deep understanding of the dynamics of inflation management, have even tended to criticize the central bank unfairly, because what the bank has been doing in the last 10 years is to introduce measures that will tackle inflation from the demand side and also the supply side. What has happened in recent times is that exogenous factors, which are beyond the central bank's control, have featured prominently in the inflation situation in Nigeria. Take, for instance, the issue of global inflation, which has been, trending since the post-COVID-19 era. The inflation figures for many advanced economies, have shot up, and that inflation there is being compounded by the breakout of the Ukraine-Russian war, which have led to further disruptions of the supply chain, and to the extent that the Nigerian economy depends very heavily on importation of certain goods and services. Then to that extent has the country been grappling with imported inflation. In other words, the domestic inflation we're experiencing in Nigeria today is aggravated by the inflation being suffered abroad. When we import at very high prices and then sell in Nigeria at much higher prices. So that's a major trigger of inflation. And then the challenges in the foreign exchange market, where the country economy at the moment is experiencing very serious shortage of foreign exchange, because the economy is not earning enough foreign exchange. The major supplier of foreign exchange to Nigeria over the years has been oil exports. And for some time now, that sector has not been adding to, foreign exchange reserves, or adding even to the domestic revenue shared through the federation account. And you find that under these conditions of scarcity, many Nigerians are still demanding foreign exchange and wanting to buy goods and services abroad or send their children abroad for studies, and the exchange rate has consequently been depreciating. So the exchange rate has also added to inflation. And then, of course, domestically,
Let's
the
go.
issue of insecurity.
Okay. Let's go on a
You
short
know
break.
that
We'll talk about that the effects of the insecurity on this inflation. We'll take a short break. We'll be back in a jiffy. Don't go away.
This is NTA News 24 broadcasting from Abuja. You can watch us anywhere, anytime on the following platforms.
Start Times Channel 101, Brit TV Channel 703, GSTV Channel 419, and Go TV Channel 46.
For more information, log on to our website www.nta.ng or join us on our social media handles, Facebook at NTA News 24.
For comments, suggestions and inquiries, send an email to news24@nta.gov.ng or call us on the following numbers.
NTA News 24,
news and more news.
Welcome back. The program is Nigeria Today, and our guests are still with us. An economist, Yushau Aliu, and a member of CBN Monetary Policy Committee, MPC, Professor Mike Obadan, joining us via Zoom. Now, Yushau, let me come to you. Now, this policy we're talking about, is it a step in the right direction? Is it well timed, or would you have preferred a different approach?
I would have prepared a different approach. I have to be more categorical. In understanding inflation, each individual in an economy understands inflation by the level of his income. And it is the role of the Central Bank of Nigeria to maintain price stability. And all options is at the disposal of the Central Bank to make sure that there is price stability. In fact, we have witnessed a season when the same central banks was able to maintain stability for a very long period. Because the foreign exchange was managed more efficiently, because the monetary policy rate were also managed more spontaneously. Looking at this, in 2009, when there was global meltdown, it was exogenous, but the central bank did a lot to maintain price stability and even improve the economy. So there are things which we must look at. President of the United States recently made a lot of emphasis on trickle-down policies on economy. It's not all theories that works in 2015 and works in 1930. You have to look at the existences of the economy. CBN must be creative. Creative in the sense that in management of foreign exchange, for instance, once individual politicians are moving around with excess foreign currencies. And what is the CBN doing on that? When dollars are being discovered outside the banking sector, what is CBN doing at that? These are some of the proactive measures that we want to see more efficient management in the allocation. And even for those who are traveling for education or those who are traveling for health purposes, and also the management for that at that level. So I think if it is to adjust this MPR or CRR to contain the present inflation without looking at the domestic challenges, it will not solve the problem, because I have a simple fact that I have raised January this year when the MPC now begin to hike the rates, and which I oppose. I said, even when you hike it without looking at what the economy is looking for, it's a vast nation with a different production capacity. National grid collapse. And if national grid collapse, it must be negative to the GDP growth. And that is why today the economy is in a fallow, being stagflated, where the GDP is not growing. Now If the GDP is not growing, it's just showing that most of the injections and probably the measures we are putting on is not responding. And therefore, the CBN, the MPC committee must look critically into it. I'm not always happy with unanimous decision in issues of this nature for many reasons. That no matter what, the economic world is divided between classicals and neoclassical and the monetaries, all preparing solution based on their understanding, because it is not a divine, but it is also guided by philosophy. So I think the right approach, we are just going closer to it, and when we get in there, that is when the prices will be stable. But so long as there is supply bottlenecks, it is very, very difficult to establish stability, especially in food inflation.
All right. Thank you. Now, Prof, could you tell us some other moves that the MPC is making or has made to further help our fragile economy that may be worth mentioning on this program? And what do you think the ultimate and expected goals will be?
Well, thank you very much, Lydia. Let me, before I address that issue, let me just clarify one or two points that Elijah Aliu made. He correctly stated that the primary mandate of the Central Bank of Nigeria is monetary and price stability. In fact, that's one reason why the Central Bank decided to go in a very aggressive direction this time around. It's a primary mandate, and we are conscious of the negative consequences of uncontrolled inflation. And that's why the central bank, has adopted, two strategies of using the traditional monetary policy instruments and supported by the development finance interventions. Alhaji Mshau said that the interventions, have not been effective. There are leakages, and the GDP is not growing. There is no truth there at all. I want to say with confidence that, but for the development finance interventions of the Central Bank of Nigeria, against the backdrop of very limited fiscal space of government, the economy would not have exited recession at the time it did. Two recessions. It was the interventions in agriculture, manufacturing, and micro, small, and medium enterprises that made the economy to exit recession and then to sustain the growth or recovery, achieved. But for the exogenous shocks, coming from abroad, the growth momentum will probably be much better than what we have today. But even then, the second quarter growth rate, was 3.54%, which is not bad on its own, although I agree that it is rather fragile. If we are able to have a handle on some of these challenges, the GDP will grow much faster. It's not that the development finance interventions were not effective. So I do agree that, perhaps some little monitoring or more intensive monitoring, we could get much better results than we have from those interventions. And he made the point that more efficient management of the foreign exchange, is needed. Perhaps, yes. But the point he made that in the during the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, that the central bank was able, to ensure price stability. Yes. Why did it happen? At that time, the Central Bank of Nigeria, or the economy as a whole, had over $62 billion in foreign reserves. It was from that stock that the bank took some dollars, to maintain stability in the economy. That's why in Nigeria, we Nigerians did not feel the impact of that crisis at that time. But the foreign exchange reserves have been dwindling. Central bank does not manufacture, foreign exchange or what goes to the external reserve. It doesn't. Dollars, pounds, and all that one. Is the export of goods and services, which central bank has no control, but is still, encouraging foreign exchange inflow by supporting certain producers that produce tradable goods, exports.
Okay, Prof, I
and
may
so
have
on.
to come in here because we're really out of time. You just give us closing remarks very briefly on how you think we can fix our economy.
We can fix our economy when all hands must be on deck, from the monetary policy to fiscal policy, and also with the discipline in between. And we must be careful not to put additional burden to the economy in terms of large borrowing.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, this is where we put a stop on this episode of the program, Nigeria Today. But before we go, I must thank you, Yushao
Thank you
Aliyu,
very much.
an economist, for your perspectives and issues raised here. And also Professor Mike Obadan, a member of CBN Monetary Policy Committee, MPC. We do appreciate you for your insight. We wish you had more time. Honestly, we wish you had more time. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
And to you, our viewer, thank you so much for watching. And remember, you can also watch this episode of the program and others on www.youtube.com/NTNews24hub. I am Lydia Odijochi. See you same time tomorrow. Goodbye.